Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Wednesday, the 30th of August. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 553 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening, and then together we will take a look at today's headlines from Scotland and around the world. More than 20 missiles and drones were destroyed by air defences overnight around Kyiv, according to the city's military administration, who described the aerial assault as the most powerful to hit the city since the spring. Ukrainian drones swept across Russia in overnight attacks that damaged military aircraft and disrupted air traffic, Russian officials said earlier today. Attacks by unmanned aircraft were reported in Pskov, Bryansk, Kaluga, Orlov and Ryazan regions, as well as the Russian-occupied Crimean Peninsula, Russian officials said. The attack on 6 regions in Russia is believed to be the largest on Russian soil since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, according to the Associated Press. The most significant attack appears to be in Pskov, where Russian officials said 4 Ilyushin-76 military transport planes were damaged. Pskov lies about 411 miles north of the Ukrainian frontier, near the borders with Estonia and Latvia. Russia's defense ministry claims to have destroyed 4 high-speed military boats in the Black Sea, carrying up to 50 Ukrainian paratroopers. It did not give any details on where in the Black Sea the incident is said to have taken place. Russian defences claim to have repelled a seaborne drone attack near Sevastopol Bay in the occupied Crimea. Sevastopol is the base of Russia's Black Sea Fleet. The US Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, has announced a new package of military assistance to aid Ukraine, including additional mine-clearing equipment, air defence missiles, artillery ammunition, and over 3 million rounds of small arms ammunition. A farewell ceremony for the Wagner chief, Evgeny Prigozhin, who was killed in a plane crash last week, took place behind closed doors, according to a statement on social media. Russian mercenaries also gathered for the funeral of Valery Chekalov, one of Evgeny Prigozhin's deputies, who was also killed in the plane crash. Yesterday, a Moscow court extended the detention of a former US consular employee, Robert Shonov, a Russian national now accused of gathering information for Washington on the war in Ukraine, for 3 months. And Russian shelling killed a 45-year-old civilian man in the Ukrainian town of Kupiansk, according to local officials, as Moscow's forces try to advance in northeastern Ukraine. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined this evening by Maureen Watt, who's a retired politician and former Minister for Mental Health in the Scottish Government. Maureen served as our regional MSP for North East Scotland from 2006 until 2011, and was then the member of our Scottish Parliament representing the constituency of Aberdeen South and North Kincardine from 2011 to 2021, when she retired. Maureen, good evening. How are you keeping?
I'm good, thank you, and good to be with you, Andrew.
Well, it's great to see you on Broadcasting Scotland this evening, Maureen. It's a few days since you and I last caught up on Broadcasting Scotland.
Yeah, and looking forward to tonight's agenda.
As am I. Thank you, Maureen. Our first item this evening is that the UK government has insisted that women will still have the right to receive equal pay for doing a similar job as their male counterparts, despite scrapping the EU law which guarantees the protection of equal pay for women. The legislation was intended to protect workers, including those whose jobs have been outsourced or who work in different locations. However, part of the guarantee was among a host of some 600 EU laws which the UK government announced in May that it would scrap by the end of this year in the retained EU law bill. One of these was an EU regulation known as the single source test, which allows workers to compare their role with that of someone working in a different establishment, if a single source has the power to correct the difference in pay or in their terms and conditions. The rule protected women whose worked for outsourcing companies or those employed in different locations but were doing similar jobs. Despite this, thousands of mostly female shop floor workers, including at Tesco and Asda, who were paid less than male warehouse staff, previously launched legal actions against their employers seeking equal pay. On Tuesday night, the government said it intended to bring back the law through secondary legislation later this year. The legislation has previously been used to win equal pay for women in the public sector after female cleaners and school meal serving staff took legal action over claims that they were paid less than male street cleaners. In 2014, Birmingham City Council agreed to pay more than £1 billion to settle the claims of tens of thousands of women, which stretched back over many years. And of course, Glasgow City Council agreed to settle their long-running equal pay claim in 2019, after the SNP took over the city administration from Labour in the 2017 council elections. So, Maureen, tying those two elements of this story together, is this yet more evidence that in fact there is next to nothing to choose between Tory and Labour politicians nowadays? The Tories apparently want to remove the protection for women of equal pay, and the Labour-controlled Glasgow City Council spent years and millions of pounds fighting against it.
I'm not sure in this particular instance you can compare to Tory and Labour. I mean, I hope to goodness, although I don't hold my breath, that the trade unions and Labour have learned from the great work that Susan Aitken, as leader of the SNP in Glasgow, has done on equal pay. And although it cost, as you said, millions, and is still costing millions, and Glasgow had to, the council had to sell off properties to meet this. They kept a promise in their manifesto to pay that equal pay that the women were due. And I think that given that the SNP was re-elected to govern Glasgow, I think that is very much appreciated and signals how the SNP govern at both local and national level. In terms of the Westminster Tory government scrapping this EU legislation, I'm very concerned, because I would have thought if you were scrapping EU law that is in statute, you would have to bring primary legislation to replace that. And clearly there is a lot that could be done in that primary legislation on employment law that needs updating and making sure that equality of work and equal pay is enshrined in new statutes. So I would be worried about bringing secondary legislation. It never gets, in my experience, the same scrutiny as primary legislation. And as women, given the present situation, I am very worried about whether there will be loopholes and everything else that unscrupulous employers, and there seem to be many who would use that, can exploit. So I think this is very worrying for women, and I hope that politicians in Westminster will really hold the government's feet to the fire on this as they bring forward this secondary legislation.
Thanks, Maureen. As is often the case, you anticipated my next question, which was just how worrying it was that this was being introduced through secondary legislation, and you've answered that now. So instead, I'll ask you, do you think, in terms of dealing with that risk and dealing with the unsatisfactory nature of employment law in the UK following Brexit, would a simpler and more straightforward answer, at least for the people of Scotland, be to devolve employment law to Scotland? There's plenty of law which applies only in Scotland as it is, but of course that's a proposal which was denied in the Smith Commission and has now been denied again by Sir Keir Starmer.
Yes. Yes, I would have come on to that as well, because, it has been talked about quite a lot recently. It's unfortunate it wasn't in the Smith Commission, but I think there's a growing body of people who want to see employment law devolved, and I've been quite involved recently in trying to help a guy keep his job, and now we're at ACAS on Unemployment Tribunal. I'm seeing lots of places where the law could be strengthened in terms of workers' rights. And, you know, in the SNP, this goes back ages and ages, decades, till the 1970s, where we were calling then for the types of works councils that they have in Europe, particularly working well in Germany, not to the detriment of their economy in any way. And I think the time has come for us to have independence so that these kind of things can be taken forward, because things change, times change, people's expectations change, and things like employment law really have to move with the times. You know, we see 0 hours contracts and things like that, and some people want to work under 0 hours contracts, but I think you should be guaranteed some sort of minimum hours and minimum income on that sort of work. So, yes, there's lots of things that new employment laws could really be done and really matter to be brought in.
Thanks, Maureen. Our next item this evening is that Scotland's onshore GDP remained flat, no change, in June, according to statistics announced today by the chief statistician. This follows no change in May, which has been revised up from a prediction of a reduction of 0.2%. In June, the output in the services sector, which accounts for about 3/4 of the economy, is estimated to have grown by 0.3%. This was offset by a reduction of 1.8% in the production sector. In the 3 months to June, GDP is estimated to have fallen by 0.3% compared to the previous 3-month period. This reflects a decline in the economy during the second quarter of 2023 after the 0.2% growth in quarter 1, January to March, reported in the quarterly national accounts that were released on the 26th of July this year. Commenting on Scottish GDP estimates, which show the economy fell in the second quarter, the Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray, MSP, said, "The Scottish economy is not alone in facing extremely challenging circumstances. The cost of living crisis and higher interest rates are impacting on the ability of households and businesses to spend, which in turn affects the wider economy." And Scottish business also continues to suffer due to the effect Brexit has had on supply chains, trade, and freedom of movement of people, which has in turn had a significant impact on business in terms of staffing. Analysis shows that the independent nations, European nations similar in size to Scotland, are wealthier and fairer than the UK, and that is the level of ambition this government has for Scotland. By focusing on the principles of equality, opportunity, and community, an independent Scotland can build a fair, green, and growing economy. Ultimately, this crisis has been worsened by the UK government's handling of the economy. We are doing everything possible with the powers currently available to us to support businesses and transform Scotland's economy. He went on, "Our New Deal for Business group to reset the relationship between government and industry is focusing on co-designing policies that will have a positive impact on the day-to-day operations of business. The group's first set of recommendations have been accepted by the First Minister, and we are already in the process of implementation." So, Maureen, thinking of the wider politics attached to this story, do you think that voters understand that in independent European nations, similar in size to Scotland, they are wealthier and fairer than the UK?
Well, I think it's something that the Scottish National Party and hopefully other independence parties and pro-independence groups continue to promote, and certainly Business for Scotland and other business groups who are in favour of independence, Believe in Scotland and others, promote that all the time. But I don't think that it is reaching enough people to, and it's not something that you can put in a 3-word slogan, is it? It's something that requires explanation and then if it requires explanation, then the mainstream media and soundbite Twitter and Facebook are not going to cover it. But websites like Believe in Scotland and Business for Scotland have got a wealth of material on why Scotland can be better under independence, and making lots of comparisons with comparable small nations in Europe. And, they've been hit by COVID as well. But the underlying principle is that there is more equality and a more fairer distribution of wealth. And if everybody feels that they've got a stake in the economy, if they feel that they've got a stake in their business, as for example, I was talking about in the previous item on works councils, then you are going to, I believe, and others believe, get greater productivity and greater buy-in to the business that you work in. Whereas people at the moment just feel that they're on some sort of treadmill of work because they're not making any headway in bringing home more money, or money that is going to buy more things, because of the way that the Westminster government is run. So I do hope that between now and the general election, we can lift more eyes and lift people's confidence to see that an independent Scotland can certainly be so much different and so much better.
Thanks, Maureen. That was very well put. I'm sure that you and I will be talking about the relative economic performance of Scotland and the UK when compared to our European cousins and friends. I'm sure that you and I will be talking about that again over the next few months. But thank you. Let's move on now, because a new survey has found that 64% of Scottish businesses think that the Scottish Government does not understand the business environment in Scotland, according to the Fraser of Allender Institute Scottish Business Monitor report. Produced in partnership with the law firm Addleshaw Goddard, the report in the second quarter of 2023 surveyed over 400 firms across the Scottish economy in July and August. Against the backdrop of the Scottish Government's New Deal for Business, the Institute asked a series of questions relating to firms' views of their relationship with the Scottish Government. The report finds that just 8% of businesses agreed that the Scottish Government engages effectively with their sector, with 67% of firms disagreeing. A slightly better 19% of surveyed firms agreed that if they wish, they know an effective route to influence Scottish Government policy, while 39% of firms disagreed. This latest analysis also finds that larger firms typically disagree more strongly than smaller firms when it comes to whether the Scottish Government understands the business environment in Scotland or engages effectively with their sector. The University of Strathclyde's Fraser of Allender Institute has introduced these questions to allow the Scottish Government and the business community in Scotland to understand how the relationship between the sectors is changing. This could help assess the effectiveness of the New Deal for Business. These questions will be monitored annually to report on progress. Other key findings in the report include that 80% of hospitality firms and 92% of other service activity businesses disagreed with the statement that the Scottish Government understands the business environment and the highest disapprovals of any sector. 86% of firms with more than 100 employees and 73% of firms with under 100 employees felt that the Scottish Government did not understand the business environment. 92% of service activities, 77% of construction, and 72% of retail firms disagreed that the Scottish Government engages effectively with their sector. Larger firms had a higher rate of firms feeling that the government engages ineffectively, with 90% of firms with more than 250 employees and 72% of firms with between 1 and 10 employees disagreeing with the statement that the Scottish Government engages effectively. Unlike previous questions, smaller businesses were more likely to not know an effective route to influence policy. Professor Barry Spowage, the director of the Fraser of Allender Institute, said, "These results are obviously pretty disappointing for the government, with the vast majority of businesses not feeling that the government understands business or that they engage effectively." So, Maureen, a couple of questions for you in connection with this item. As I was saying, against the backdrop of the New Deal for Business, the Fraser of Allender Institute asked a series of questions relating to firms' views of their relationship with the government. Now, the First Minister set out plans for this New Deal for Business as part of his policy prospectus, which was published on the 18th of April this year. The polling by Fraser of Allender was apparently in July and August. So is it in fact a surprise that the New Deal for Business hasn't had much of a chance to stretch its legs and make a difference yet? It was only introduced a few months ago.
Well, while you were reading all those statistics and giving us them, which are really interesting, I was thinking, I wonder what the answer would be to these businesses in relation to the Westminster government. And, the fact that larger businesses are feel more disengaged doesn't surprise me because they're probably based out with Scotland, and that it would not be their first port of call. But engagement takes two, Andrew. Both sides need to engage, and I've never known the Scottish government not to engage. If, as an MSP, I asked them to come and visit businesses in my constituency, ministers would come. If I had a query on their behalf, it would be answered. Having said that, there was a perception, maybe with some truth in it, that the former First Minister was more interested in social policy than economic policy. But I think undoubtedly the current First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, is definitely set on resetting that imbalance, if you like, and has done so since day one. And Neil Gray is certainly pushing that. However, I did also hear that the business community is a bit wary of the well-being agenda. Well, get on board, chaps, mainly chaps, and see what can be done. As we were talking about earlier, if you want your businesses to grow, and growth is sluggish under Westminster economic policy, let's see what happens in other countries that are on this well-being economy agenda and see whether fairness and equality leads to higher productivity, for example. And let's see if that can reboot the Scottish economy. I believe it can. It will take some doing it, and it will take engagement and a willingness of the business community to try that. But again, if you look at those businesses who believe in Scotland and believe in Scottish independence, they will tell you that this can work. So let growth has been sluggish in the UK for years and years now, and surely a resetting rather than on the same path as both red and blue Tories down south think is the way forward. Let's try something gradually that can probably make a big difference, as we can see in other economies.
Thanks, Maureen. We are definitely aligned this evening. I was going to ask you about this issue of larger firms, and I was going to make the point that the sponsor for this report is the law firm Addleshaw Goddard. Now, when I worked for them, admittedly a very long time ago, that business was headquartered in Edinburgh. Now it's headquartered in London. So it's not a surprise that larger businesses increasingly are not headquartered in Scotland, and as a result, don't very much engage. But we'll put that to one side because time is not on our side this evening, and we'll move on. But I completely get the point that you were making. But our next item is that as part of drastic measures taken to save £47 million to balance the books, in March this year, the SNP and Liberal Democrat coalition in Aberdeen City Council reduced the funding of Sport Aberdeen initiatives by £687,000. The Aberdeen Beach Leisure Centre and Bucksburn Swimming Pool were to be knocked down as a result. At the same time, 6 of Aberdeen's libraries were also closed. Community campaigners were prepared to contest the shutdowns in court, instructing solicitors to take Aberdeen Council to the Court of Session. But protesters have claimed victory now, with council bosses now accepting the need for a full, formal consultation on the impact of closing the libraries and the swimming pools. Aberdeen's most senior city officials have now been told to apologise for the mess of the closures. The Aberdeen TUC President Graham Farquhar has called for councillors to demand an apology from the Chief Executive Angela Scott, who's been in the role since 2014, and her senior officers. The council's co-leaders, Christian Allard of the SNP and Ian Yule of the Lib Dems, declined to comment, given that the campaign may yet still end up in court. The other parties on the council would not be drawn on the resignation calls either. A report reflecting the input from the now hastily arranged public consultation is expected to be put to councillors in December. It will come 8 months after books were packed up and mothballs rolled out at the 6 locked-up libraries, and the pool at Bucksburn was shuttered. So, Maureen, do you think does this story and the issues arising in Aberdeen in particular, does this reflect the challenges facing councils across the whole of the UK at the moment, with the cost of living crisis compounded by more than a decade of austerity, or is this more related to particular issues in Aberdeen City Council?
It reflects the pressure on council, throughout the whole of the UK, it's really regrettable that swimming pools and libraries were targeted as areas for closure in Aberdeen, particularly libraries. Libraries, as we've seen during winter, can be warm hubs, and so much can happen now in libraries. They're not just a place where you go and it's totally quiet to read, especially with IT technology, reading groups for children, and coming in if you haven't got a decent computer or any computer at home to work there. So I was really disappointed that libraries were targeted, and I think libraries need to be pretty much open in every ward. With the swimming pools, I can understand that. When Sport Aberdeen counts swimming pools, they also count the ones that are in private gyms. Now that's ridiculous, because most people can't afford the subscription to a private gym. However, the Beach Leisure Centre is decades and decades old, and heating that, I mean, Dundee got rid of its one on the front, remember, to build the V&A museum, and I'm not sure if there was a great hoo-ha there, and Aberdeen was nothing as good as the Dundee one. So with that one, I'm okay. Bucksburn, not so, because there's not really swimming facilities in that part of town. But yet again, I mean, these swimming pools cost a huge amount to heat. And the other thing is, I don't know why these ones were targeted, these libraries and swimming pools. But if you don't use them, then the saying goes, you lose them. So it was heartening to see people objecting to it, and the council listening, and they're doing a huge consultation exercise on how the citizens of Aberdeen believe that their council tax and the money from Scottish Government should be spent. So the results of that will be very interesting.
Thanks, Maureen. It was good that we could get a story from the North East and from Aberdeen, especially as we have you joining us on Broadcasting Scotland this evening. We'll move on now, though, because EasyJet has begun the repatriation of its customers stranded by Monday's collapse of the UK's air traffic control system, with 5 flights scheduled to bring customers back to Gatwick, as airlines estimated that the failure could cost them up to £100 million. Airlines are facing costs in the tens of millions, according to Willie Walsh, the former chief executive of British Airways, who is now the Director General of the International Air Transport Association, as disruption extended into its third day. The chief executive of the Air Traffic Control Service, NATS, formerly National Air Traffic Services, Martin Rolfe, confirmed the chaos was caused when part of the system collapsed on Monday because it didn't recognise a message. Rolfe's comments appear to corroborate claims by unnamed sources that the failure was triggered when a corrupted flight plan could not be processed by the system. Walsh said the outage led to the cancellation of about 1,100 flights to and from 4 UK airports, Heathrow, Gatwick, Stansted and Manchester, on Monday, affecting the journeys of hundreds of thousands of passengers. He said NATS had questions to answer, adding it was staggering that a single piece of data could have been at fault. Rolfe apologised to affected passengers and said the company did not underestimate the impact of the outage. EasyJet said that the first of its two repatriation flights would depart the UK on today to collect passengers from Palma and Faro. These will be followed by flights to Tenerife and Tunisia tomorrow, and the Greek island of Rhodes on Friday. It added it was operating larger aircraft in popular routes, including Faro, Ibiza, Dalaman and Tenerife, to provide approximately 700 additional seats this week. Now, Maureen, I'm going to quote here from a House of Commons committee report from the 19th of November 2003. It said, National Air Traffic Services, NATS, is the company which provides air traffic control for aircraft flying over the UK. In July 2001, the Transport Department at Westminster concluded a public-private partnership with the Airline Group, a consortium of UK-based airlines, giving that group operational control of NATS. Proceeds were nearly £800 million. But the structure of the public-private partnership has affected NAT's ability to finance its £1 billion of investment programme over the next 10 years. So should we be surprised here in 2023 that a business privatised as a PPP partnership under Tony Blair has failed to invest in its critical systems such that they are now so fragile and apparently have very little resilience?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what exactly was the cause of it. If it couldn't recognise something, then was that somebody or a body trying to sabotage NATS? Or is it, as you say, Andrew, possibly due to lack of investment? And the virtual privatisation of NATS, I can remember at the time that was fiercely contested, that such a critical part of infrastructure was being privatised. And I hope that a Westminster committee will perhaps look at NATS again to see exactly whether it falls into the same category as privatised water companies who have been taking profits out and not investing in infrastructure. I wouldn't be at all surprised if a committee reached that finding. But in terms of EasyJet, that's really good PR, isn't it? That they're putting on these extra flights. I doubt that we'll see Ryanair do the same. But it's had a huge effect on transportation and communication. I mean, 2 weeks today, we got our first granddaughter who's in London, and we're desperate to go down to see them. But with a rail strike this weekend, you see the cost of flights shooting up right away, and it's going to cost an arm and a leg. But of course, we'll have to pay because we're dying to see our granddaughter. But it's affecting everything, because of the rail strike at the same time. So I think it's going to last a few weeks before planes are in the right place, and as a result of the rail strike, trains are in the right place. So yeah, travelling this weekend is going to be a bit of a nightmare.
Thanks, Maureen, and that's a great way of bringing home the fact that this disruption has real life impact on people, including new grandmothers and grandfathers. So we'll hopefully the impact is minimised for you guys. Let's move on now, because the new analysis has found that the European Union used less coal, oil and gas than it has ever recorded. The 27 member states burned 17% less fossil fuel to make electricity, between January and June 2023 than over the same period in 2022. That's according to a study from the clean energy think tank Ember. The EU made 410,000 kilowatt hours of electricity, 410 terawatt hours of electricity from sources that release planet heating gases, which analysts say is the lowest since 2015, the first year for which they have monthly data, and very likely the lowest since 2000. The drop in fossil fuel generation was driven by a fall in demand for electricity and a growth in clean power, the study found. To try to stop planet heating, the EU has promised to cut greenhouse gas pollution by at least 55% from 1990 levels by the end of this decade and to hit net zero emissions by 2050. To get there, it will have to use less energy, but more electricity than it does today, as more people heat homes and drive cars with electricity instead of fossil fuels. The report found that fossil fuel generation in the first half of 2023 fell more than 20% in 11 EU countries and more than 30% in 5 of them. 14 countries saw their lowest total fossil generation on record for the period. In 7 countries, Austria, the Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, Italy, Poland and Slovenia, fossil fuel burning hit its lowest levels this century. The findings back up analysis in June from the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air, a non-profit research organisation which showed a clear shift away from fossil fuel powered generation in the EU. So, Maureen, I'm interested that in that list we heard mention of Denmark and Finland, near neighbours of Scotland. Do you think that our near neighbours might have some relevant lessons for us in Scotland as we similarly seek to reduce the demand for electricity and also increase the proportion of renewable electricity in our energy mix?
Yes, and it would be interesting to see what the comparable figures are for the UK and broken down to see what Scotland is, because I think we know that Scotland is increasing its energy from renewable sources virtually day on day. So that would be good to see. And you mentioned Finland and Denmark at comparable latitudes to Scotland, managing to reduce their energy and consumption lower. Now, it doesn't. You haven't said, Andrew, whether it breaks down domestic consumption and business consumption. That figure would be good to see as well. But I think we kind of sometimes we pat ourselves in the back that we're doing well on this, but and we were leaders, and we still are leaders in Scotland in renewable energy. But there's absolutely no leeway to take our foot off the gas. Well, I shouldn't have said that, should I? Our foot off, making sure that we continue to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. And hey ho, we have the Westminster government giving new licenses for fossil fuels. So it looks as if we're going in UK terms into reverse gear on this, and that is really worrying. But we know, for example, that in most other countries, our housing is much more energy efficient, better insulated, and all these things at the end of the day make it easier, perhaps, for these countries to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels.
Thanks, Maureen. Now then, Mark Thompson, a former New York Times CEO and before that the BBC's Director General, has been named as the new chief executive of cable news giant CNN, tasked with reviving the network's sagging ratings and falling profits. The announcement followed much recent speculation and follows Chris Licht's exit in June. Licht had a rather rocky year in charge, which included a much criticised town hall with Donald Trump and the shutdown of CNN Plus streaming service only weeks after its launch. Warner Bros. Discovery, the owner of CNN, are hoping that an executive like Mark Thompson with experience at the top level can turn CNN around. Thompson was Director General of the BBC, the top executive job at the national British broadcaster, from 2004 until 2012. Then he moved across the Atlantic to become Chief Executive of the New York Times, where he was for 8 years until 2020. Now, Maureen, thinking of this story for a second, Mark Thompson's time at the BBC saw the BBC suffer scandals, including the Saxgate affair, for which Ofcom fined the BBC £150,000, describing the Radio 2 broadcast left by Jonathan Ross and Russell Brand on Andrew Sachs' voicemail as gratuitously offensive, humiliating, and demeaning. And he also oversaw a series of budget cuts and staff redundancies. So, do you think can staff and customers at CNN expect much the same?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? If your career falls apart in the UK, you just hop across the Atlantic and you can usually pick up some very lucrative work there. Andrew Neil's another example of that, wasn't there, before he came back to Britain. So, um, I mean, CNN is quite a good channel to get some news of North America, but it'll be interesting to see how he fares in the top job there. If cost cutting is the main driver for the board of directors, perhaps he's your man, but I really hope that it doesn't affect the pretty good output of CNN. You know, if you want good news from the States, then you're better there than, for example, Fox News, for example. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how he fares there.
Thanks, Maureen. Now, detectives have renewed an appeal for information as they continue their efforts to locate the bodies of Rennie and Andrew McRae. Renee, 36, and her 3-year-old boy Andrew left their home in Inverness on the 12th of November 1976. Their BMW car was discovered on fire in a lay-by near Dalmagary later that evening. Their bodies have never been found. William McDowell was found guilty of their murders at the High Court in Inverness in September 2022. He later died in February this year. Detective Chief Inspector Brian Geddes said Rennie and Andrew's family and friends waited decades for justice, which was served last year. However, their bodies have not been found, and our investigation continues to explore all possible opportunities open to us to help answer that final, most important question in order to provide Rennie and Andrew with the dignity they deserve. Excuse me. He continued, "We continue to review the available evidence to identify any further areas of interest, while also considering whether there are any opportunities that modern technology could assist with in identifying possible deposition sites. This review includes considering any properties which may have been linked to William McDowell, which he could have used, possibly a derelict building, an empty one, or even an occupied one he had the use of. The timescale would have been the early to mid-1970s, and we are hoping that someone may remember seeing Rennie McRae's BMW in an area perhaps with McDowell's company Volvo or the family white Range Rover. We are also considering possible sites where they may have met during their relationship, possibly including the Blackfold area above Loch Ness, Inverfarigig, and between Nairnside and Daviot. This case will never be considered resolved until we find Renee and Andrew. We owe it to the family and friends to make every effort to recover their bodies, and I would urge anyone who may be able to assist, no matter how small you may feel your information is, to come forward. Anyone who believes they can assist the police is asked to contact 101, or you can also contact Crime Stoppers anonymously on 0800 555 111. Now, Maureen, the attention to this awful case has picked up again this week. There's been coverage again on other channels, and I'm not sure that there's a great deal that can be said about this item. However, do you have any recollections or reflections on the disappearance of Mrs. McRae and her wee boy Andrew in 1976?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I remember it well. Well, maybe because it's rehashed. That's not a very nice word, but it's brought up time and time again. But I do remember it from the very first time, and how it was something that was pretty new, and didn't happen hadn't happened before in my recollection. So it was something that was um, in the news, and you read about it, every little detail in the P&G, which of course is the newspaper that covers the north and the northeast. And I did catch that program about it on BBC Alba, I think it was, or BBC Scotland, the other night. I don't know if it was one of a couple of programs, but anyway, I did watch it, and I just wondered. I listened to McDowell's wife's testament, and I thought, so I wonder if you know. I wonder if you would let. She clearly was very annoyed with her husband, and I wondered if she would at some point spill the beans, but. Whether McDowell was the only one that knew and just wasn't telling anybody, or what, I just don't know. But I mean, Cold Case Review by Police Scotland has resulted in the conviction of McDowell, and has resulted in the convictions of others. But not finding the bodies and putting them to rest is really something that I think the families that are left are due, and it would be great if this murder case was finally solved. And yeah, watch this space, as they say. Continuing story.
Thanks, Maureen. I think your thoughts, prompted by Alex Prentice's cross-examination of Bill McDowell's wife, was exactly the same reflections that we had in this household when we were watching it. So from a lawyer's perspective, that cross-examination was very interesting. But insofar as there are still people alive, including, as the police have said, members of the McRae family, Andrew had an elder brother who is still alive. So the attention from the police and the continued investigation can only carry on until their bodies are discovered, and we hope that they are very, very soon. But let's move on to our final line. Sorry, go on, Maureen.
No, I was just
After
going to
you.
say, I think Rennie's husband and certainly her sister are still alive too. And it was interesting watching McDowell's expressions when his wife was giving evidence as well. So, yeah, I wonder if there is another program, or I'm sure, as I say, it's awaits the next chapter.
I think that programme, without talking too much about the BBC, that was, I think, the first of two programmes, so there is more to be broadcast. You're right.
Yeah.
A fund to help inspire entrepreneurs to start or scale up their businesses has been relaunched by the Scottish Government. The Ecosystem Fund is being widened this year to include initiatives encouraging young people to consider entrepreneurship from an early age. Applications providing access to support services for underrepresented groups, including women or those from disadvantaged areas, will also be considered. Community groups, non-profit making organisations, industry bodies, colleges and universities are amongst organisations invited to bid for funding to help boost entrepreneurial activity across Scotland. Grants of up to £50,000 will be available. Projects might include showcasing Scotland's startups globally to attract talent, investment and strategic partners, networking events allowing founders, investors and partners to share expertise and foster connections, training, mentorship and identifying growth opportunities by providing funding for staff, equipment, meeting places or programs for startups, encouraging entrepreneurs who support fair work and environmental good practice to make a positive impact on communities, the promotion of learning and teaching in entrepreneurship, and tackling barriers or discrimination preventing women or other groups from accessing support. The Wellbeing Economy Secretary Neil Gray said, "This expanded funding will build on Scotland's international reputation as one of the best places in the UK to do business, and will help to make an impact across the business community." Despite representing less than 1% of businesses, startups generate more than half the value of all small and medium-sized businesses. The fund will spark innovation while fulfilling our potential to nurture many more inventive new startup companies and driving sustainable growth. The Ecosystem Fund is an important step, but we must make further progress expanding entrepreneurial access and opportunity, ensuring that everyone, no matter their background, has the chance to fulfil their potential. Together, we can remove barriers and open up access and opportunity to budding entrepreneurs across Scotland. By uniting the business community around this goal, we can create a well-being economy which is fair, green and growing. So, Maureen, do you think is the Scottish Government, and we've been talking about the new business deal, but do you think is the Scottish Government doing enough, in Neil Gray's words, to spark innovation?
Well, I think Business Gateway, which has been on the go for quite a long time, is pretty good at helping um, small businesses um, get off the ground. I mean, it runs a huge amount of free courses to help budding entrepreneurs. But I think this is probably one of these things that happens from time to time, a kind of reboot, a relaunch of something. And it's probably Tim Aisley with a new First Minister and a new Cabinet Secretary in place to do that. And I think also given the emphasis on the green economy and fair work and everything to highlight again that the Scottish Government has your back and is willing to help you if you have a business idea that you think can float. And it's really important that the wealth of money and talent in the private sector is involved in this. I mean, there are people like the Hunter Foundation, for example, and other similar ones, where the wealth of knowledge and talent in the private sector can be harnessed to help business startups. So if you have an idea, for goodness sake, don't just sit on it, but discuss it with any of these organizations. Business Gateway is obviously the channel to do that. But look on the websites and certainly take it forward because business startup is about risk and entrepreneurship is about risk. And often they can be very successful. What bothers me further down the line is that so often businesses are started by really good budding entrepreneurs in Scotland and then is um, eaten up by big corporations that are perhaps competitors or just wanting to finance companies, private equity companies that want to give them millions to take them over, and then of course they just kind of disappear into the ether rather than perhaps helping them further down for them to take over other companies or just expand what they're doing. So I think this is a good initiative, and it's interesting that the social sector organisation and I hope cooperatives are also given the chance to bid for this money.
That's a very good point, Maureen. The statement from the Scottish Government does talk about community groups, non-profits, industry bodies, colleges, universities, and others. So we can hope that, as you also say, working constructively with Business Gateway, that they will be able to pull together and make the most of the opportunity to spark innovation as a result of this initiative. So thank you, Maureen. But I'm afraid that is all that we have time for this evening. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes and to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to pay our bills is still pressing. However, the generosity of our supporters has given us a little more time. We've now raised over £16,000 and we are able to continue making programmes for the next few weeks. But our need to raise the remaining £14,000 is really urgent. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you'd like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in any other way that helps, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. Please like and retweet us there, and you can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. We will be back at 7 p.m. sharp tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come and join us then. I'd like to thank everyone who's been watching this evening, and of course, in particular, I'd like to give a very special thanks to our very special guest, Maureen Watt. Thanks, Maureen.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it. I hope our viewers did too.
I'm sure they did, Maureen. Thank you. On this day in 1930, the inhabitants of St Kilda, which lies 40 miles west-northwest of North Uist, were beginning their new lives on the mainland. They had finally left the island on the 29th of August. All the cattle and sheep were taken off the island 2 days before the evacuation by the tourist boat Dunara Castle for sale on the mainland. Observing tradition, the islanders left an open Bible and a small pile of oats in each house, locked all of the doors, and at 7 a.m. boarded the Harebell, which took the remaining 36 inhabitants to Morven, a decision that they had all taken collectively together for themselves. Please look after yourselves, and please have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.